Yeah, I mean, we can actually say what just happened to us, right?
Yeah, go for it.
So as I mentioned, my ISTJ husband is our cameraman, and he's also been the one so far who is, he's blushing behind the camera. He's also been the one so far who's been doing the amazing editing on our videos. And by the way, he's been editing for about 3 weeks in his whole life. So I'm impressed.
Yeah.
So he had a work call while we started our filming. When he got all the cameras set up and set them all up to record, and they were recording, and we came in here and did the most amazing version of this. And we got about 3/4 through what we were saying.
Right.
And we realized that we hadn't put on our microphones. And that's what happens when two intuitive types are, supposed to be working on this. And our sensing type wasn't here to say, you missed that very
important step, which was the microphone.
Oops. Welcome to Personality Playbook. I'm Sadie Young.
And I'm Kayla Whittle.
And I'm super excited today, as I am on all the days that we do this podcast, because we're going to be talking about sensing and intuition today. And sensing and intuition are the ways that we take in information and the kinds of information we like and trust. And I think one of the things that really strikes me about enjoying talking about sensing and intuition is that this is how we learn. This is the biggest preference that has to do with how we learn. And I also think it's really interesting because it's the only set of preferences that's not a 50-50 split in the population.
Right.
So we talked about last week that extroversion and introversion were 50-50 splits, but sensing and intuition are not even close to that.
Yeah.
According to the last national sample, which was done in 1998, they really should probably update that.
Oh, yeah.
That's been a minute. It's when I graduated from high school.
It would be interesting to see if the split changed significantly or not.
But at least at that time, 73% of the population reported a preference for sensing, and only 27% of the population reported a preference for intuition. So if you've ever felt like you were a little bit strange, this might be why. It might not be why.
Yeah.
You could just be weird for other reasons.
Right. You could just be weird.
Right.
And we're okay with that because weird is welcome here.
Exactly. Weird is our people.
Yes.
So Kayla and I both have our middle two preferences in common. We're both intuitive feelers.
Yes.
So we decided that we would each take a preference that we have and each take a preference that we don't have. So that means that I today will be covering sensing, and maybe I should apologize for that. This is going to be an intuitive's way of explaining sensing. Now, I will tell you that my entire family has a preference for sensing, and so does my husband, who's the guy behind the camera over here. In case you ever see me looking past the camera, that's who I'm looking at over there. And if you ever think I'm winking at you, I'm probably winking at him. So I have a lot of experience with sensing types, but I'm still very much an intuitive type. So with that being said, I apologize for doing this in an intuitive way, but I'm going to do the best I can.
We're going to be great. It's going to be fine.
It's all good. So with that, people who prefer sensing like to see it, touch it, smell it, taste it, hear it. They take in information through their 5 senses, and they love that kind of information because it can be proven. Those are all physical types of information. They also take in a lot of information through their past experiences. They say, if it ain't broken, don't fix it.
Right.
If I did it that way before and it worked, I'm going to do it that way again. Mm-hmm. And if I did it that way before and it didn't work, I'm not going to try it that way again.
Right.
So I'm pretty sure the people who invented the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. I think a sensing type probably said that.
Yes.
And I think to most people, that's going to be like, duh.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's just exactly how that would make sense to work. That people would function in that way. But you'll see that that's not always the case.
Not always the case.
So these are people who I like to talk about the forest and the trees metaphor with.
Yeah.
And people who are sensing types, when there's a forest, will look at the individual trees in the forest. And that's how they see the forest as a whole. So instead of seeing forest, they see trees 1 through 100. And by the way, they do like doing things in this very step-by-step 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Things go in chronological order.
Yeah, linear.
Very linear. Yes. So they like for things to happen in that order. A, B, C, D, E, F, G, all go in the same order. I always think about outlines when I'm thinking about sensing and intuition.
Right.
And that's probably because my 7th grade teacher, my 7th grade science teacher specifically, made the most detailed outlines I think I have ever seen in my life. So I'm used to outlines that have Roman numerals and then capital letter and then maybe a lowercase letter. But hers went all the way down to the lowercase I. I'm pretty sure that's 8 million steps in.
Something like that. I think that's pretty precise. 8 million.
Yeah, which, by the way, that's me being an intuitive type. We're kind of the exaggerators.
Yes, for sure.
That's not... Sensing types would not say that, I don't think. So, so she went all the way down to the lowercase i's, and sensing types would see that and assume that that information is very necessary. And I'm sure that she thought it was necessary. She wanted us to learn every single detail.
Right.
And I looked at that and was like, what? You want me to learn all? That's a lot of information you've got there.
Right.
So, generally speaking, sensing types are going to be into that detail.
Sure.
They tend to be practical and realistic. And when this comes to school in particular, they're very concerned about the here and now, and they're very concerned about how things apply to their lives in the here and now.
Right.
So if they're learning something in school that they can leave the room and use immediately, they're really going to pay attention to that. In college, in particular, they're going to be people who kind of hate to take the classes that don't apply to their career.
Right.
They really want to take the classes that are going to get them a job and be specifically useful, unless they will still take extra classes if it's something they're really into. Like you can be really into sports and want to take some sort of sports class.
Sure.
And you're not going to do that for a living.
Right.
But it's still an interest that you have there.
Yeah, which is a good time to say that interests exist outside of the scope of personality.
Absolutely.
So as we're talking about sensing and intuitive types or introversion, extroversion, or whatever we're discussing, any of those types can have a wide variety of interests, right?
Talent.
And talent.
Completely outside.
And all of those gifts and abilities and talents and interests exist really outside of personality preference.
Yes.
It's how you like to learn about those things or the method in which that you go after those interests. But interests exist on this larger scope and this outside place, and personality is at the core.
Yeah.
And intuitive and sensing types could have, that's a great way to say it. Sensing and intuitive types could have the same interests, but the way they approach those interests are just different.
Exactly. Absolutely. Yeah. So it doesn't influence the expression of those pieces.
Absolutely.
But it doesn't, we can't tell you a certain type that can sing.
Sure.
We can tell you a certain type that may be more inclined to enjoy performing, but whether they're good at it or not is a totally different situation.
Absolutely. Yes. Yeah.
So sensing types are also people who like SOPs, standard operating procedures. And when you have a sensing type who starts a job, they'll usually expect for there to be such a manual.
And tell me exactly how to do this.
Exactly. Right. What's the correct methodology for doing the job? What are the guidelines? What are the rules of working at this place? And a lot of times they find that no such thing exists. And I think part of the reason that no such thing exists in a lot of places is because, let me tell you what type likes to write the SOP manual. There isn't one. Nobody really wants to write it.
Wants to do that.
Because when you have a sensing type and you give them what sounds like a project, such as writing
an SOP,
an SOP manual, they see every single standard operating procedure that goes into that manual as a separate task. So you may think you've given them one task, you've given them 2,000 tasks.
Right.
That's way too much for anybody.
Right.
But they really still want to have that everything written down so that they can go back and make sure that they've done it correctly. Or, they at least like to have a person who is kind of like the personification of an SOP manual, that person that every company has that knows all the things.
Right. Like, let me watch you do this. I'm going to do it alongside you. So if I don't have something written telling me exactly what to do, I have a case in point, an example right in front of me that says, I'm going to work alongside you until I know what to do from here.
Right.
And knowing what all the details of those tasks are makes them feel confident and comfortable.
Exactly.
Right? And SOP is like, okay, I can be confident in moving forward in this job and moving forward with what I'm doing because I know exactly what it is that I need to do and exactly what it is that I need to execute.
Sure. And definitely there are other parts of type that will impact whether you prefer to learn from a person or learn from a manual or those kinds of things.
Sure. Mm-hmm.
But either way, a sensing type is going to want to have some kind of place where this is written down in concrete.
Right.
This is the one way that you do this.
Right.
And not, there are 43 different kinds of ways to do this. Yet sensing types, when you give them lots and lots of choices, are like, can you just tell me what you want me to do?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, just stop. This is something me and my husband Ben run into a lot.
Right.
Is I'll always be like, you can do it this way or this way or this way or this way. And he looks at me like, what? He just says, just tell me how you want me to do it. And I've gotten to the point where I try to just say the options in my head and then only give him one. And I feel like I'm being wrong to him.
Sure.
By not giving him the option.
So many ways that you could approach this. I don't want to limit you.
Exactly. But he would like me to limit him.
Right.
And that's how that tends to function. So last but not least, we'll say that sensing types may seem materialistic and overly literal to intuitive types.
Sure.
And, when we do this with intuition, when we say the thing at the end of that's what they seem like to sensing types, I always say, I don't know what you're talking about. That's what I do.
Yes.
Yeah. So with that, we're going to flip it over to Kayla for intuitive types.
Right. So I think I'm going to start with the example that you gave of the forest and the trees. So Sadie mentioned that for sensing types, they need all of the trees and they put all of the trees together and then the forest makes sense, right? And then I can see kind of this scope of all that I need to take in, right? Whereas an intuitive type is going to do that directly opposite. They're going to want to go in, take in the full view of the forest, right? See this big picture, and then be able to go in and fill in the details that they find are important and necessary to fill in, which are not as many details as a sensing type does. So if you want the big words,
as many.
Yeah. So if you want the big words for this, we're talking inductive reasoning versus deductive reasoning. And so they're going to go beyond what is concrete. And an intuitive type is actually going to enjoy the abstract, right? So they're going to enjoy the symbolism. So if we think about taking in information, let's say reading, for example, some types like to read and some don't, or listen to books or podcasts or whatever. A sensing type is much more likely to be drawn to like a biography or even historical fiction, right? Like some things that have like some concrete ways to identify with another person's life or with something that's happened in the past or with the way something works, right? Whereas an intuitive type really is going to enjoy that space where symbolism exists.
Sure.
And you're putting together like what were they talking about in the book versus what was the big message that they were trying to give us in the book. I can remember being an intuitive type. I read a book called How to Read Literature Like a Professor. And it sounds like the most like nerdy book ever.
Wow.
But I loved it because I love the symbolism. And I feel like it, taught me kind of like some of these like standards. So for example, if you see water or rain in a book, that it's going to symbolize change in a lot of books. I love that. And it completely changed the way that I read books moving forward because I enjoy that piece of it, right? Yeah. I want to know that like big overarching message. Like what was this book saying about society?
What does it mean?
Exactly.
We always want to know what does it mean.
Exactly. What does it mean rather than kind of like the words on the page, right?
Yeah.
And so kind of like enjoying that space more.
And how everything connects.
Absolutely. Which is a beautiful bridge into patterns.
There you go.
Right. So intuitive types, we mentioned that sensing types think in a linear way. So if they're going to tell you a story, they're going to start with the beginning of the story. It sounds so silly to say because most of you are going to be like, yes, you start at the beginning of the story. Right. So if you come home and you're a sensing type and you're talking about your day, you're going to maybe like start at the beginning of the day.
In the morning.
In the morning. And then go through and finish and all the way up until present time, right? That seems like a logical way for sensing types to speak.
Yep. For
Right?
guidance to speak. Sure.
But because intuitive types are making connections that aren't necessarily linear, they're not connected to a time schedule or they're not connected to this, then that, then next. They're connecting to different themes that they've seen throughout the day or feelings or emotions that they've had throughout the day. And they're using those places to connect meaning. Then stories seem a little ping pong, right?
Yes.
They're like, okay, let me tell you about this like really exciting thing that happened today. And then this really crappy thing happened today. But let me tell you, then this happened, right? And that could be the afternoon and then the morning and then right before you walked in. And sensing types are like, wow, that was a lot. I don't know. Anyway, I'm talking about like a conversation between my husband and I right now,
Sure.
right? It's like I come in and I'm kind of like bouncing all over the place, right? And he's going to tell a story in order,
Right.
right? And it's just
Yes.
different. It's just a different way of seeing things, taking in information, and a different way kind of like to speak that out.
I always describe it as being like a spider web
Yes.
because, to an intuitive type, to me, I usually start with whatever was the most important thing to me that happened that day.
Right.
And then I could go any different direction on that spider web. And I'm
Right.
not going to tell you the points that I use in between the first thing that I told you and the second thing that I told you, but there
Right.
could be 63 different points in there.
Yeah.
And I promise you they connected in my head somehow. It's
Right.
not random,
Right.
but I don't feel a need to share my work with you.
Right. Which is a great point and a good example to give. So let's say my husband and I are riding down the road and he comments on the landscaping in a house in our neighborhood because that's something he often does, right? Like, oh, I like the grass. Their grass is always nice, or sometimes it's not a nice thing to say or whatever,
Yeah.
something about, that. And I'm listening and taking it in. And in my head, it's, oh yeah, that looks nice. I bet they're going to start decorating for Halloween soon. I remember last year they had a really big spider in their front yard. I don't really like decorating for Halloween, but I love decorating for Christmas. And you know what I wanted to decorate for Christmas? I wanted one of those llamas that's actually a Christmas llama.
Oh,
And I'm like, oh, I would love to have a Christmas llama for the front porch. But all of that happened just in an instant. All of those little connected weird things that led me to thinking about Christmas llamas, right?
exactly.
So it might have been quiet in the car. Maybe not. It might have been quiet in the car. And Chad just talked about the condition of someone's lawn. And my response is, have you ever considered getting a Christmas llama for our front porch?
Yep.
And he's just like, wow, I have not. But also, why?
It sounds like you weren't paying attention to it, but you totally were.
I was fully engaged in what he was talking about, right? But the connections that an intuitive type makes are just different.
Yeah.
And they make sense and they're silly and they're laughable to us, but they can seem a little odd, weird, far-fetched, and hard to follow for sensing types.
Yeah.
Right? So I think if anybody's ever looked at you and said, where did that come from? You might want to consider you could be an intuitive type.
It's quite
Or if
possible.
you have ever been the person that looked at someone else and said, where did that come from? You might be a sensing type, right? Because
Right.
we're just trying to figure that out. So you can imagine that an intuitive type is also going to be pretty imaginative. They like to live up in this hypothetical space, right? Like, what if all this could happen this way? Or what if we could make art that looks like this? And what if it could symbolize this meaning, right? We enjoy those conversations and dreaming about future possibilities and what could be, and just really throwing out things that may or may not ever be possible.
And those clouds are two dogs that are barking at each other.
Yes.
And they're very upset.
Yes. Yeah. So
And
we
here's
like,
their backstory.
yeah, and we like new ideas and new ways of doing things. And for sensing types, that may seem like a little bit impractical,
Yeah.
right? Like, why are you spending so much time and energy thinking about what isn't really here in front of us today,
Sure.
right? And what I like about this is if you think about, the population, we really don't need to have 70-ish% of people as intuitive types.
Right. The amount of ideas that would occur from that.
Yeah.
Hold the
So
world.
many ideas, so little execution, right? So we do need a population that has majority sensing types, right? But you also have to be able to have some of those people that are like dreaming and thinking about like what could be in future possibilities. But often those aren't the people that are going to sit in the meeting and plan the execution, right?
Yeah, I mean, we can actually say what just happened to us, right?
Yeah, go for it.
So as I mentioned, my ISTJ husband is our cameraman, and he's also been the one so far who is, he's blushing behind the camera. He's also been the one so far who's been doing the amazing editing on our videos. And by the way, he's been editing for about 3 weeks in his whole life. So I'm impressed.
Yeah.
So he had a work call while we started our filming. When he got all the cameras set up and set them all up to record, and they were recording, and we came in here and did the most amazing version of this. And we got about 3/4 through what we were saying.
Right.
And we realized that we hadn't put on our microphones. And that's what happens when two intuitive types are, supposed to be working on this, and our sensing type wasn't here to say, you missed that very important
step, which was the microphone.
Oops. So this is our second go around with sensing and intuition.
Right.
And we were both saying, to a sensing type, that would have been a great opportunity to practice, and they could have built on what it was that they said before.
Right.
And to us, we're not going to say it as well as we did before because this is a whole new day.
Right. Exactly. It feels like pressure now, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's like catching lightning in a bottle a little bit, I suppose.
Right. Well, and, if you think about it, you had used standard operating procedures a lot as an example, right? That like when you have this guide that I was saying that sensing types who have a guide, like an SOP, are going to feel more confident and comfortable with the work that they're doing because they have the guide. Whereas an intuitive type is going to feel a little bit limited by the SOP.
Yes.
I'm going to feel a little bit suffocated if you tell me exactly how to do something. I would rather you tell me like, hey, Kayla, this is what needs to get done. This is the final product. You just kind of run after it, right? Mm-hmm. And I'll kind of figure it out along the way and come up with my own way of doing it. But if you tell me exactly how I'm going to do it and each little individual step, that is going to make me feel stressed out.
Yes.
Because I don't know that I'm going to have the attention and focus I need to match every detail specifically.
Yeah.
And I don't really understand why I have to do it that way, right?
Because that's not the way it makes sense to do it in your head. You have to come up with your own process.
Right. And that's why I think math, just math. I'm just, I think that's why math was frustrating for me. Because if you can just tell me what the problem is, tell me the goal of me doing this problem and kind of where I need to land on it, and then let me figure it out, that is going to be how I'm going to learn math.
Right.
But so often, I don't want to stereotype, but so often a math teacher is going to be an S.
Right.
And they're going to give you all of the details about each of the steps, which is what 70-ish% of the population wants whenever they're learning, right? And that to me is just like, oh my, that is way too many steps. Like I just get overwhelmed by the details and I don't get the point of it because I get lost in the forest, right? I get lost in the forest when it comes to math. But if you can explain to me the concept and what I'm trying to figure out, right? And what this formula is going to land me on, then I'm probably going to be able to dig around enough to get to the answer.
Yes.
It's why I liked geometry.
Yeah.
Because it was like, here are how angles work. Here are how shapes work. This is what you're trying to find. And then I could just say, okay, I know how that works. And I know what I'm trying to find and I can go after that. My friend says that I like geometry and statistics because I don't like math.
Right.
which always makes me laugh. She's like, those are like the least mathiest maths of all the maths,
but
right?
When you're supposed to show your work and it's supposed to be something specific, no, I'm not perfectly happy to show my work. I was about to say that I was. I will under duress show my work.
Under duress, yeah.
But my work is not going to be what the teacher told me to do because I didn't see the point in 5 of those steps. And so I'm going to have 3 steps instead of 8, and I'm going to get counted off. And my steps are not included in her 8.
Right.
Either.
They're just different.
So, yeah, but I got the right answer. And so I'm sitting there going, why did I get points off? Because I actually made it easier.
Right.
even though nobody else understands what I did, but it was easier for me and I got the right answer. So why am I getting 5 points off?
Sure.
So,
Sure. Yeah, so I think to me, like one of the key features in this and taking in information is that the details and the steps and the building blocks help sensing types feel confident and capable. The details, the steps, and the building blocks for intuitive types make us feel a little uncomfortable and limited.
And now it's time for my favorite portion of each of these presentations, which is the section for the visual learners. Once again, I want to mention that these animations that I made years ago are based on drawings that were originally made by my beloved mentor, Nancy Barger. And this one is based on me and a friend of mine who only have one preference that is different. I am an INFJ and my good friend is an ISFJ. And this is both of us telling a story. So it goes a little bit like this. My friend went on her honeymoon to Hawaii, and I've never been to Hawaii before. And so I said, hey, tell me a little bit about your honeymoon. You went to Hawaii. That's amazing. Tell me about it. And my friend said, well, we were late getting up because, we were exhausted. And so we got stuck in traffic on the way to the airport. And when we finally got to the airport, the plane was delayed. So we ended up hanging out in the airport forever reading books. And we finally got on the plane and they had to de-ice the plane. And finally we took off. And I said, oh my gosh, I wanted to hear about Hawaii. I used to work at the airport. I don't want to hear about the airport. But of course, my friend started at the beginning because I asked her about her honeymoon, right? So she started at the beginning of her honeymoon and she was telling me step by step about her honeymoon. If I wanted different information from her, perhaps I should have asked a different question. Like, I was really interested in waterfalls, and maybe I should have said, tell me about waterfalls. And then she would have started with that instead of starting at the very beginning of their trip. But that's how sensing types tend to work, is they start in the beginning and they go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I went on a cruise and my friend said, hey, tell me how your cruise was. And so I was like, oh my gosh, we went to this amazing restaurant last night we were there, which was so much better than the first night we were there, that we went to this restaurant where they played songs on glasses and I couldn't believe it. The food on the boat was really pretty good, but I can't believe they have that carpet in the hallway that kind of makes you sick because it's a crazy pattern that looks like a kaleidoscope. And my friend said, what? Wait a minute. You started on the last night of your trip and all you told me about was food. And you didn't tell me anything about going there. You didn't tell me about anything about what you did on the trip while you were there, except for going to restaurants and eating on the boat. And really, you're going to tell me about the carpet in the hallway? If you've ever been on a cruise ship, you know what I'm talking about. That carpet in the hallway. I'm like, people are already kind of dizzy when they go there. So what are you doing making them dizzier by putting kaleidoscope print on the carpet? So I would tell you that I went in an order, but my order was based on what was the most important thing to me. And I'm a foodie, so I talked about food first. And I talked about the meal that stood out to me the most. And then food reminds me of other food, which reminds me of how the food made me feel, which might have been kind of nauseous when I'm on a boat. And so that led me to talk about the thing that made me more nauseous, which was the carpet. So it's not that I didn't have an order. It's just that my order was very different than a sensing type's order. It had nothing to do with chronological order. It was an order of importance in my mind. Now, I will ask you, which one of the two of us would you like to get directions from? Because I'm going to guess that it's not me. Intuitive directions tend to be more like turn left at the bush that looks like a duck, but what if they trim the bush? Yeah, so definitely want to get directions from the sensing type. So I hope that helps all of the visual learners out there clarify a little bit more whether they prefer sensing or intuition. I find a lot of times when I talk to people about sensing and intuition, especially because we started doing this mostly in a college environment,
Right.
I end up talking a lot about struggles in school and struggles with formalized learning.
Sure.
So, I would say that kindergarten through 12th grade is pretty much built for sensing types. I think, teachers tend to walk you through things. You're trying to make sure, especially now, this is way more so true than it was when I was in school, which just made me sound 100. But, all the standardized tests that people have to do now,
Right.
They basically teach you the test in school because they have to make sure that people pass so that they get funding and things. And so all of that tends to be very sensing. You tend to get a lot of details. You're told exactly what's expected of you. And so sensing types tend to thrive in that environment if they're going to thrive in school. I don't want to act like everybody thrives in school because it's not everybody's thing, regardless of your type.
Sure. Yeah.
But intuitives, like we were talking about a minute ago, tend to feel like when you're given so many specifics that are what you're supposed to do, that it's really like being put in a cage in a lot of ways.
Mm-hmm.
And so you find that a lot of intuitive types really space out in K through 12, or they're very bored
Mm-hmm.
in K through 12. So then what happens? Sensing types, a lot of times, I've seen this a million times. They'll get great grades when they're in high school, and they a lot of times work really hard to get them, but they get these great grades. And, you'll have intuitive types that are C students or B students or whatever the case may be, who have just been hardly paying attention
Sure.
in school, and
Yeah.
they just kind of scraped by to get out of there. And then you get to college, and things fall apart a lot of times for sensing types. Because so many of the things in college, first of all, when you get to college, you get a syllabus at the beginning of the semester, and nobody's going to babysit you and say, this is when this is due, this is due,
Right.
this is due. You should be this far along in this process, and it's going to be due, and you have to turn it in. You know the due dates of all of your assignments on the first day of class. You're supposed to keep up with it yourself. And a lot of the assignments that you're going to get are much more open-ended than they used to be.
Right.
It's, read this book and decide on a theme about it, or write whatever you want.
Yeah.
And it doesn't have to be a certain length. And so sensing types are going, but so when you say it doesn't have to be a certain length, does that mean over 5 pages or under 5 pages, or is that 10? And they're like, yeah, when I said no length, I meant no length. And they're like, but I don't know how you're going to grade it if I don't. So they have all the questions about,
I always say sensing types love a rubric.
Yes.
Yeah.
Sensing types love
Sensing types.
Yes.
Sorry.
You said the gist of the word because you're an intuitive type.
We got close enough. Yeah.
We make contractions that don't exist.
Right. Right.
And I know what they mean.
And I think, part of the reason why intuitive types enjoy the college setting a little bit more is because typically intuitive types, I can't speak today. Typically intuitive types like this mental gymnastics.
Yes.
Which sounds really silly and strange, probably. But mental gymnastics is just like, hey, let's just go to this place and have this conversation about meaning and the meaning of life and this existential crisis that people are having, or like societal issues, right? And really just kind of like living in this abstract place and just staying there and having these conversations, which college professors love to do.
Yes.
So I really loved that about college, was that I could sit and be involved day to day in mental gymnastics.
One thing that I did that was probably a very intuitive thing, and I ended up having to tell my professor what I was doing because it got kind of dicey for a second. I ended up having to take a philosophy course, long story, that I didn't really want to take.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought it was so boring. And so what I decided to do to make it more interesting for myself is I decided that I would write all of my papers with the opposite of my opinion.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
And I thought that was fun. The reason it got dicey is because the third paper was something that it was, like nobody could possibly disagree with this. And I'm about to write it backwards, and you might think I'm some sort of serial killer or something after I do this. So I finally told my professor, I'm like, let me just tell you what I'm doing. I don't actually think this.
Yeah.
But
I just made it a goal.
yeah. And so he was like, oh, I love your papers, and And I'll say this, most teachers in K through 12 are sensing types and most college professors are intuitive types.
Sure.
So he was completely into what I was doing, and it made me not feel like I was trapped in a box in that class.
Right.
But I really did have to be careful because I was like, this, oh my gosh, if I actually thought this, it kind of started freaking me out. That's the topic that I had to write about because I was like, I'm not evil.
Yeah, no, it's just this kind of like fun place where you get to kind of explore these ideas and these theories that may or may not pan out. And as an intuitive type, whether or not the theory will pan out doesn't impact my interest level in talking about it now.
Right.
Right? Like, I could spend an hour or two talking about a theory that a sensing type in 2 seconds could say that would never work. And I like the yeah, but.
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. My husband always, he messes with me now about saying actually.
Uh-huh.
Because he'll talk to me about something and I'm thinking on it and I'm like, well, actually. And he's like, oh gosh, here it comes, actually. Right. But it's not that I mean to be
combative.
Yeah, combative, or that I'm trying to disagree with him or disprove him in any way. It's just that I like that like exploration.
Yeah, and looking at things from all of the different viewpoints.
Right. And I can know even before it comes out of my mouth that we're probably still going to land on whatever he just said. I just like the conversation.
It's still enjoyable to look at all of those different angles. It's
right.
The geometry comment. We like
exactly. Yes, it's the angles.
We like angles and their metaphors.
Right.
Well, and it's funny because I can hear Ben's voice in my head as I'm talking while he's sitting back there, and he's going, why does this matter? What do you do with this? Because if you don't figure out, what difference it makes, then why are you talking about it? Mm-hmm. So that's what I end up talking about, I think, with sensing types that go into college and have this falling apart piece. I know when I was a counselor at a college, I would have kids come in my office a lot of times halfway through the first semester and go, I used to make really good grades and I'm failing everything and I'm stupid. And no, that's not what's going on. You're not stupid.
Right.
So I think for sensing types, I think it's important to say, how can they successfully get through college when they're struggling with this piece? Mm-hmm. So yes, you have the work ethic. I think what the difference is when you get to college, you have to build your own structure.
Right.
So I would say if you get that assignment that says, this paper can be any length and it can be on any topic, give yourself parameters.
Right.
You can set up your,
I've decided, and you can even sit with another sensing type that's probably feeling the same way you are. And say, what are you going to do? Let's decide that we're both going to write a 5-page paper.
Yeah.
What's your prompt going to be? What's my prompt going to be? Right. Let the intuitive types go find a corner and just write to their little whimsy heart's desire. Yeah. But then the sensing types, like, I love that. Like, just creating their own structure for things is great. And then in the workplace, if you come into a role and you think, wow, there's no standard operating procedure here. I don't know exactly how they want me to do this. Right? Just as you go, as you figure out something that works for you, write the SOP, right? Yeah. And then it doesn't feel like I've got to write a whole manual of SOPs,
right?
Because you have kind of created this structure as you go along the way.
Yeah. And maybe ask people that you see doing a good job at a particular thing.
Right.
Can you write down what you do on this one thing?
Right.
And then you're not putting all of the responsibility on one person,
right?
But you're collectively making this. And I would say, too, for people who are about to go to college, maybe think about which teachers you have liked the most, which styles you've liked the most, which structures you've liked the most, and learn that structure. Maybe you haven't thought about the actual structure before, but you just know that has worked for you.
Right.
And maybe make some notes about that to keep for when you go to college so that you can implement that structure yourself to help you get through those classes.
Right. And even assigning, this sounds like really silly, but assigning yourself homework. Like, the professor didn't tell me that I've got, to answer the 12 questions at the end of this chapter, but that helped me in high school, right? Whenever I answered the 12 questions and I submitted those for a grade. So I'm going to answer those 12 questions, and that's going to be my homework that I'm assigning to myself. I think the difference there is not that intuitive types need zero structure. It's that from the beginning of K through 12, we've been functioning at our own weird structure anyway, right? And so it doesn't feel new and strange that we're walking into a world and kind of setting up our own parameters and our own thoughts and making these different types of connections, because it's something that intuitive types have done naturally from the beginning.
Yeah, we've been trying to make somebody else's structure fit what we wanted to do the whole time.
Right.
So it feels like more freedom.
Yes.
We wanted it.
Exactly. Whereas, again, it's that the structure and the details make sensing types feel confident and comfortable.
Yes.
And the removal of structure and details makes them feel kind of out of control and makes us feel free as intuitive types. Yeah. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, they feel like they're falling off a building.
Right.
They feel like we're paragliding.
Right. And I think it's important, as we're using a lot of examples, I guess is the word I'm trying to think of, that come from education, like whether that be K through 12 or college, right? Because when we're discussing this preference, we're talking about how we like to take in information. And I think traditionally we view taking information as this traditional learning set.
Mm-hmm.
But we have to remember that as human beings, taking in information is what we're doing all day, every day.
Yeah.
Right. We're learning, we're absorbing the things that are happening around us. We're processing relationships with people. We're processing how different things work in our home. We're processing parenting. We're learning our children.
We're trying to figure out how to drive somewhere.
Yeah, absolutely. And we all, again, have these preferences and ways that our brain works as we're absorbing all of this information. So I just kind of wanted to point out that while we're using education as an example, because it's the most concrete way to explain taking in information, that it's important to realize that we are always, every day, taking in information all day long, right?
Yeah.
That's what our brains were created to do, and that's what they are doing all the time.
Sure. I mean, even as far as what TV shows you watch, you process those differently.
Right.
That's information that you're taking in.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, I really feel like this is such an important part of who we are. I remember when we first started doing this and you were telling me that you thought that extroversion, introversion, and thinking and feeling were going to be the two most popular episodes of this going over the preferences part. And I was like, really? Because I think I totally agree with you on EI.
Sure.
And then I was like, I think it's going to be SN, but I think I think a lot of people have relationship issues with T and F.
Sure.
Or which is going to be our next video.
Right.
Those are the ones I think you think about the most. But I kind of think sensing and intuition are relationship issues that you don't realize are related to sensing and intuition.
Yeah, I think that's a great point.
Yeah. Now, that may be because both of us are married to sensing type.
And we see how that goes, right?
Yeah, and we're sitting here going off on our tangents, and they're like, but what's for dinner? And we're like, but the universe.
Yeah.
Come on.
Well, and I think, and I'm probably going to say this in almost all of the videos, right? But being able to see value on each side of the preferences is so key in living a fulfilled life.
Absolutely.
And getting along with others, and not just getting along with them and not just tolerating others, but truly appreciating them, right? So while the S and N differences, and my husband and I are different in every letter.
Yeah.
We're, in every way, we're very, very different people. But in the way that can create tension and frustration, we have to be able to see that as a way to complement one another.
Mm-hmm.
And that we're all bringing value because we're all individuals created individually, but that we're all necessary and needed to be able to move the ship forward. So like in our home and raising our children, that our children need both Chad's sensing type and my intuitive type in order for things to go well, right?
Absolutely.
And being able to see value in the fact that we're really different. Again, I'll probably repeat it time and time again in these videos.
But it's the reason we have microphones.
Exactly. It's the reason we have microphones, right? Because I even said before we started this, I was like, hey, if we're going to start on our own, could you make us a checklist? Right? And so he was like, checklist. And I'm like, yes, like I really want a checklist. And you know what? I don't want to make it. because Ben's checklist will be better than my checklist.
Yeah.
And I'm going to appreciate it, right?
Uh-huh. Yeah,
I mean,
and he will probably think he needs to put more detail in his checklist than he does. And so he feels like he shouldn't write it because it won't be as good as it should be. But he doesn't realize that our checklist would have 3 things on it. And his will at least have 12.
Table, camera. Got it.
Shit.
Yes, right? Or when I'm leaving to go somewhere and the husband's like, keys, wallet, cell phone, right? He always says, "You're the dumbest smart person I know." and that's like, obviously he's joking, but he's joking and he's not joking, because he's like, how can you sit and have theoretical weird conversations all day long and not know where your cell phone is? Because I feel like knowing where your cell phone is seems much easier.
Well, and we'll get into this with the INFJ video, I'm sure, but my terrible thing that I can't do, like being the world's dumbest smart person.
Yeah.
I can't put my clothes on right. I'm telling you, I will put my shirt on inside out or backwards.
Yeah, it happens to me.
Single day. I put my pants on backwards sometimes. How do you do that?
Just not paying attention to it.
Yeah, and so I get laughed at all the time. And by the way, that is an INFJ thing. I'm not the only one that does it, so we'll talk about that more later. But yeah, for sure, it's like I can literally build a dining room table from scratch.
Yep.
Design the thing, make my own plans, run all the saws. Can't seem to put my shirt on the correct way.
Yeah, mine is song lyrics. I know, when I'm interested in music, right? So, like, I know so many song lyrics, and Chad's always like, wow, so glad that you remember every word to The Lion King. Very cool. Can we please not leave your purse at work again? Okay. I see your point.
Yeah, I get that. There's a whole corner of my brain that's dedicated to song lyrics.
Song lyrics, yeah.
And it runs. I was trying to tell Ben this the other day. That part of my brain runs 24/7. We didn't really talk about that with intuitive types, but we have multiple tracks going at the same time.
Tabs.
And one of them's a sound. There you go.
Yeah. So, and that's both a literal and a figurative example, right? I truly, on my laptop, have like so many tabs that you can't read the tabs.
Exactly. Me too.
Open all the time.
Absolutely.
And sometimes there's a random tab playing music, and I'm like, where is it? Where's the music coming from?
Open the iPad and it says there's a video, and you're like, I'm not playing a video. What is this?
Yes. And Chad might have a couple of tabs open, but it's just a couple.
Yeah.
And it's definitely wide enough that you can read what's happening. Yeah. Right. So he comes in and he's like, Kayla, the tabs.
That is my very intricate filing system.
Right. But then that's also my brain has lots of tabs open all at the same time.
And one of them's always
playing music.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And sometimes now it's The Lion King because you said that. Sorry. So thank you for the circle of life.
Pink pajamas, penguins on the lawn. And if there aren't song lyrics, you just have to make them up. So
I see what you did there.
I think we've intuitivated ourselves to the end here.
Hey, you see, we also like to make up words. They don't need to exist before it's all good. If you went to high school with me, you were schooliotic. You might remember that's patriotic to your school, by the way.
Schooliotic, I like that.
Yeah, I made that up years ago. Shout out to, Jeanette and Nicole from high school because they still use those words sometimes. So before we take up the entire bandwidth of the internet, talking about intuition.
Right.
I think we're going to go ahead and call it for the day.
Yeah.
And we will certainly revisit these topics because I just love them so much.
Yay. Mental gymnastics and
integration. Yes. And I'm so much better at those than I am at any physical activity at all.
Absolutely. Only mental gymnastics.
Only mental gymnastics. So thank you so much to all of you who have been watching. Please make sure to like, share, comment, and enjoy the ninjas there. And I should make them go this way because I always try to make my finger go this way. But when you're looking at the screen, they should go this way, right? No? Ben says, you see, I'm an intuitive type. I don't know which direction things go.
But the ninjas will be right.
The ninjas will be there, and I hope you enjoy them. And we will see you guys all soon.
Bye.
Bye.